The Himalayas form the highest mountain range in the world, stretching across 2,500 kilometers and 7 countries from east to west. "14 peaks of more than 8,000 meters can be found here. Several of the world's greatest rivers rise in the vicinity of the Himalayan range, which also encompasses about 15,000 glaciers. Ice and snow aside, the range's tropical latitude, combined with its many different altitude zones and its rainfall and soil conditions, make it home to a variety of distinct plant communities. If you want to witness the fragility of life, come to the Himalayas. And if you want to witness the toughness of life, also come to the Himalayas. At an elevation of more than 4,000 meters, the peaks and passes of mountains become corridors for strong winds. The smallest amounts of heat and moisture here, it seems, will be quickly swept away by torrents of frigid air. So to survive, plants need smart coping strategies. First and foremost, they must keep a low profile. One variety of plant manages this very well. With stems tightly packed together and close to the ground, they are named cushion plants. They are firm, dense, and elastic. Some are covered with fine hairs and spread across the rocks like a blanket. Growing together, they retain warmth and moisture and attract other plants. Clusters like this form a delicate patchwork at the foot of snow-capped mountains. Of course, keeping themselves alive isn't the only thing these plants must accomplish. They also need to reproduce. So at an elevation of 4,500 meters and early in the morning, a mysterious green flower can be seen blooming. It's called the Himalayan blue poppy, and it usually grows in places that are high and steep and difficult to access. This is the target of its flowers, a bumblebee that has a much bigger body than common bees and is therefore more cold resistant. It's well adapted to live in high altitude areas, although it isn't found in great numbers, and that leads to fierce competition among flowering plants here to attract it as a pollinator. In the mountains in springtime, flowers are blooming. Plants no longer hunker down, but instead make a proud display of their vitality. The alpine flowers appear intensely colored under the high-altitude ultraviolet light, a must if they want to attract the attention of pollinators. The advantage of the Himalayan blue poppy in this regard is its big flower. Few insects can ignore its existence. It is the bumblebee that pollinates it. The high altitude of this area has exerted its own kind of selective pressure on organisms that live here. But it wasn't always this way. Strangely, this landscape was once underwater. In the Nanjing Institute of Geology and Paleontology, Chinese Academy of Sciences, there is the world's largest and most comprehensive collection of Himalayan fossils.
然后这里给你们展示的呢是一种海象的动物化石，叫鹦鹉螺，是游泳类的。它所保存的层位呢，大概应该相当于珠峰最顶部的那套灰岩的层位。
Chinese paleontologists have been making scientific expeditions into the Himalayas since 1966. Over the years, they have found a large number of marine fossils of creatures that lived from the Ordovician 200 million years ago to the Eocene 40 million years ago. 45 million years ago, the Himalayas were an undersea strait between Eurasia and India. Subsequently, the slow collision of the Indian tectonic plate with Asia formed the highest plateau on Earth. As a young range, the mountains are still growing at a rate of 1 centimeter a year. Their flora and fauna have been steadily evolving over the tens of millions of years since they rose out of the sea. Tracking the course that this evolution took has been a focus of botanists worldwide, as has been the quest to find plant species that have not yet been discovered. In 2014, an international group of botanists began working together to compile flora of Pan-Himalaya, which it's envisaged will fill 50 volumes for publication after 10 years. Hong Duoyuan, a famous Chinese botanist, is the chief editor of the project.
泛喜马拉雅地区，从尼泊尔的东南角50米，海拔只有50米，到它我们俩交界的珠穆朗玛峰，直线距离多少呢？我测了一下子，大概不到200公里。那么短的距离，高差是那么大，低海拔地区还有很多是热带的东西。然后呢，就到亚热带，然后到温带、寒温带，到冻土层，那植被的变化垂直带非常的明显，这是最完整的一个垂直带，世界上别的地方没有。
As the highest mountain range on Earth, the Himalayas have the most complete vertical distribution of plants, and this is one reason for the region's rich biodiversity. Rhododendron, for example, is one of China's best-known flowering plants. One of its centers of origin is in the Himalayan region, and the greatest diversity of rhododendron species can be found here, with intensely colored blooms of many different hues visible during the flowering season. At different altitudes, their characteristics change. species that grow in lower areas can grow into tall trees. As the land rises, varieties become smaller. This is a common alpine rhododendron species. It has a short and tight umbrella-like form, with smaller leaves and flowers. Growing closer to the ground makes it an easier target for animals looking for something to eat, like this mountain marmot. But since this rhododendron grows up to 5,000 meters above sea level, such foragers are rarer, and thus less of a threat. The different climatic conditions found at different altitudes have pushed the flora found in them to evolve in different directions. From low to high, the vertical distribution of alpine plants can be roughly divided into broad-leafed forest, mixed coniferous forest, and coniferous forest. Then above the tree line, there are alpine meadows and shrubbery. As the altitude rises further still, green plants gradually disappear to expose bare, rocky slopes. Intense solar radiation and repeated freezing and thawing here increase erosion, with rocks splitting into fragments. This is an alpine scree slope, the last zone with vegetation below the snowline. Covered by loose fragments of rock, there is almost no soil here. So what plants have adapted to such conditions? This seedling emerging between the stones will grow slowly in the freezing weather here, until it develops after around 30 years into a spectacular form, a giant tower which can reach up to 2 meters in height, the Sikkim rhubarb. It has huge protective leaves or bracts that overlap each other like roof tiles. These shield its interior from ultraviolet light, in addition to keeping it warm. Under the sunshine of midday, its internal temperature can increase to over 10 degrees Celsius. This characteristic has led it to being called a glasshouse plant. Underneath the bracts can be found the plant's flowers, which makes it very attractive to insects. The insects will find not only nectar when they come, but also warmth. When it is cold and raining on the mountain slope, inside here is a more hospitable environment. In return for this refuge, of course, the insects serve to pollinate the plant. With insects rare and inactive at such a high altitude, the Sikkim rhubarb is remarkable as an outstanding adaptation to the harsh environment. Conditions on the Himalayas slopes depend on which direction they are facing. On the range's southern side, for example, warm, moist air from the Indian Ocean travels north before being blocked at higher altitudes. The Himalayas' southern foothills, therefore, are an area of intense rainfall. The deep canyon of the Yarlung-Zangbo River acts like a heating pipeline, funneling warm and moist air up its course. This enables the growth of the northernmost tropical rainforest on Earth, with its own rich biodiversity. One area of study by paleontologists is the spores and pollen of ancient plants. They are small enough and invisible without a microscope, but they are abundant and well preserved during the process of fossilization. While studying plant fossils found in southern Tibet, paleontologists have found species that originated not in today's Eurasian landmass, but instead in the southern hemisphere. Over 200 million years ago, the southern hemisphere was home to an ancient continent called Gondwana. With time, Gondwana split into landmasses that are today's India, Africa, and South America. As the Indian plate drifted north, it also brought with it the flora and fauna of the southern hemisphere. In the southern Himalayas between China and Nepal, there is plenty of warmth and rain. At an altitude of 3,000 meters, cliffs are covered with purple flowers. This is a ginger plant called the ivory ginseng in China. Its petals are not symmetrical, unlike most flowers. Its upper and lower petals are different. The base of its corolla is elongated into a pipe. Unlike in colder and drier areas, the diversity of insects here is extremely rich. Plants can therefore pick and choose their pollinators. To take the example of the ivory ginseng, a bee is too large to enter the long neck of its flowers and is shut out. There's nothing it can do to get the sweet nectar inside. By evolving blooms of such an unusual shape, the plant is limiting itself to an equally unusually equipped insect. And here it comes. Its mouth parts can be twice the length of its body, so maintaining balance while it flies seems like a miracle. Of course, this long proboscis is specially adapted for it to feed on this plant. It's a type of fly. Like the plant it pollinates, it is native to the Himalayas. Its special structure makes it completely dependent on the plant for survival. Worldwide flies with such proboscises share southern Africa with long tube-flowered plants as their center of evolution. It's therefore likely that both this fly and this plant are descendants of creatures that lived in the southern hemisphere hundreds of millions of years ago. The Indian plate traveled a long way to collide with Eurasia. The diversity of species resulted after the two met to push up the Himalayas has made the region a hotspot for wildlife research.
这个地区地形地貌，那么高山峡谷这么奇特，而且高山植物也特别丰富，形成了它的植物的多样性和独特的一些，这些都是我想也是这个世界的都想要深入研究的问题。
This is the story of the plants of the Himalayas. In these magical mountains, they grow and flourish in unique splendor. They are conquerors, having adapted through millions of years of evolution to the region's often harsh conditions. They were also forerunners that made it possible for more living beings, including our own, to settle on the region.